Today we're going to take a look at the European colonization of the Americas, one of the means of empire building in the early modern world. Okay. So with that, we're actually going to try to evaluate a set of questions here as well. Okay. Particularly this one right here, evaluate the regional and interregional causes and effects of European colonization in the Americas. So we'll look at some of the causes and then some of the consequences as well. Okay. And we're going to compare as well. We're going to examine the colonization in Spanish America and juxtapose the differences with British North America and then some of the challenges that both empires and both states will have to endure as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the causes of colonization to begin with. First of which deals with a technical cause. In other words, the ability to be able to go from point A to point B using ocean sailing technology. So whether it's the lateen sails, those triangular sails from the Indian Ocean dhows, compasses, sea charts, all that stuff that's been influenced in the traditional trade realm in the Indian Ocean, and you could even say the Mediterranean. Again, this interaction here is going to create, in the end, the allowance of technology that brings about European colonization south to the African shores, and then also eventually west as well. There are also a number of financial causes as well. In other words, you need to be able to finance these expeditions that the Europeans will eventually take. And so there are a number of different ways. The traditional way is state sponsorship. And so sailors like Columbus, for instance, ended up getting support from the Spanish crown. And look, Columbus is from Genoa. He's from Italy, actually. And so we actually tried to get a number of Genoese city-states, the Portuguese, to try to sponsor his ideas and his missions before he finally convinced the new Spanish crown to be able to do so. Portugal already had a number of missions, and particularly under the leadership of Prince Henry the Navigator, who you see here. Portugal, as a state, ended up sending a number of missions around the Cape and Africa into India as well to set up a number of colonies, and we examined that in a DBQ prior to this as well. So a number of royal missions, another state-sponsored missions out across the oceans. And in doing so, they were able to generate, and for them, not only explorers, but also conquerors as well, the various conquistadors that received royal blessing for their missions and some funding. But people like Cortez and Pizarro, they are, in a sense, adventurers who received permission from the Spanish state to conquer, but not necessarily, this is not a Spanish crown, they're going to send their large military and fleets across, at least not yet. But eventually they will. But explorers and conquistadors will be sponsored by the state. And then there's something that is completely new, and that is the creation of these joint stock companies, or the corporations. So in the independent private entities who decide to come together, form a corporation, and then from there make it an investment. This is a risk that they're taking, and some of them eventually will fail. So for instance, a famous first attempt to colonize Virginia will set up a colony in Roanoke, and that in the end completely failed. In fact, the entire population may have just completely been wiped out because they couldn't survive in the New World. Jamestown, the next subsequent attempt created by the Virginia Company and sent out to try to find gold and other resources, they barely survived, and much of it is due to the support of Native American tribes by Powhatan and his Confederacy, and that leads to that story of Pocahontas, John Smith, and so forth as well. But these are all done privately by joint stock companies as a venture to try to create and generate profit. And so we're going to explore both Spain and England using three themes, and we're going to use a little bit of alliteration here. Glory, for God, and for gold. This is why Europeans in the end settled into the New World. And so we're going to use this as sort of to discuss the political, the religious, and economic motivations in the New World. So we're going to examine this in these particular three themes. So we're going to first of all look at Spain. But before we get to the Spanish colonies, we have to go back and talk about some context as well. Okay? So part of this is Spain is a relatively new nation state, a joining together of the feudal kingdoms of Aragon and Castile, and when they're bound together, they are bound together in a single mission. And one of the contexts that we want to take a look at is the existence of the Crusades. Yeah, the Crusades that trying to take the Holy Land from Arab and Muslim powers. Well, the Reconquista, the conquering of the Moorish kingdom in southern Spain, is in a lot of ways a part of the process of crusading, to be able to take lands for Christendom, take them away from Muslims, and so forth. And so part of this process is the invasion of the Moorish South and the Iberian Peninsula and the formation of the Spanish state itself here. But this itself as a mode of conquest, that they are just simply expanding Christendom, not just in Spain, but also in the New World as well. That this is part of the process of Christianizing people who do not believe, right? And so the Reconquista is occurring, and so the religious motivation to conquer is there. Right? And the reason why, when you look at Cortez and Pizarro, they brought with them priests as they went about their conquest. Right? The other of which is feudalism. We talked about this force that is starting to die out in Europe, but it's also the definitive political economic structure in most of the countrysides in Spain as well. And so when they start to conquer lands elsewhere, they're going to take this system and they're going to implement this. This is in a lot of ways what they have already known. So as a result of this, they're going to utilize feudalism as a means to define how this new society is going to look like. So let's go and take a look at the political situation in Spanish America. Now, first of which, Spain is dealing with more lands than they could ever dream of. In fact, most of this that they claim, they have no idea what's here in the first place, deep within these particular places. And so what they decided, however, because they're going to have the resources to do it, and they want to take advantage of gaining some of these resources, is going to create an intrusive structure, what they call the República de Indios, the Republic of the Indies. And in so, they want to try to control it as well as they possibly can. So they created a series of advisors, governors, and so forth. And it begins with the viceroys. They're going to divide these large territories into more manageable sizes, and they're going to have a person that will become sort of the political and judicial authority. Just like a king is there to settle disputes among their people, the king is going to appoint a viceroy because they can't decide on cases that are thousands of miles away, that are 200 days of travel away. And so there are representatives of the kings, these viceroys, that will govern New Spain and the other territories as well. In some of the cities and regions that they're able to develop because they put so much resource into it, they appoint corregidors, in a lot of ways, mayors and governors of these cities and towns that get populated by both Spanish and locals as well. And finally, the conquistadors are going to be given large land grants, and these land grants are called haciendas. So the conquistadors themselves, they'll become known as the haciendados. In a lot of ways, this is going to look a lot like European feudalism. They will become sort of the protectors of these large lands, and many of the native populations that remain and that survive through smallpox, they now in a lot of ways become the serfs of these particular regions. And there's going to be a lot of exploitation that occurs, especially very early on in these societies. But either way, because the Spanish are going to call for direct control, that they're going to decide on policies and the social structures, it's going to result in huge administrative costs that they're going to try to deal with because they have the resources to do so. More on that in a little bit. But again, we talk about these haciendas that are developed. The haciendados are controlling these vast estates here, and they're going to control the local population through what is known as the encomienda system, whereby, again, the Native Americans in a lot of ways become serfs of these large estates. They're tied to the land. They're supposed to be taken care of by the conquistadors, these haciendados, but a lot of times they weren't. And so the encomienda system is to try to ensure that in order for these guys to retain their haciendas and these land grants, they're supposed to take care of the native population. Okay? The Spanish will also take advantage of the Incan mita system as a means to garner this labor tax that eventually kind of morphs into, in a lot of ways, coerced labor. And you'll see some documents on this in a latter assignment as well. Okay? In order to keep all of this order, the Spanish wanted as much control over the process as possible. So what they're going to do is they're going to go ahead and generate a social hierarchy that will be based on birthright. Again, we talk about feudalism, the existence of lords and nobles. And so as a result of this, your parentage, okay, is going to really define your social class. For instance, if you are from Europe, if you're from the Iberian Peninsula, from Spain, in other words, hey, you are a peninsularis, and you're going to be given exclusive rights in terms of access in regards to land purchases, access to government positions and jobs. The titles, viceroys, for instance, are all peninsularis as well. Their children who are born in the Americas will have some of these rights, not all of them, known as the criollos or the criollos. And then there's everyone else. And particularly the diverse population that's going to be created in the Americas is Spanish are going to try to define this, right? So if you are born a peninsularis from Spain and you marry a mestizo and you have children, your offspring will be will be known as the mestizo, right? So you've got two different groups and so forth. I'm going to try to define it based on your parentage. But again, you can imagine as generations and generations go about, how do you know if somebody's from Spain or have a certain parentage, right? They're going to have forms and documents, but in the end, a lot of ways, it just becomes about your skin color. And so we're starting to see the generation of sort of the racialization of a social hierarchy in New Spain. So that becomes one of the inherent consequences of this system. Now, this is the intrusive structure means that is going to be really, really high cost. And so initially for Columbus, because he initially did not find gold or silver, they tried to utilize and create a new slave trade. But with the number of Native Americans who will succumb to smallpox, it was not feasible. And over time, there are ways by which they can generate revenue. One of which is those haciendas, right? In a lot of ways, again, it looks like feudalism. So they create self-sustaining haciendas that are now exporting goods, cash crops such as cacao, tobacco, agave, sugar, and others. Now, note the colors here. The greens mean that these are crops that are native to the Americas and will thrive because they become export goods across Afro-Eurasia and the rest of the globe. And then you've got goods that are coming in, particularly sugar, coming in from the old world. And this will become a huge source of revenue for the Spanish and particularly the Portuguese as well. There are huge properties, these pastoral estates that are created, and so a lot of American cattle, horses, and others that are created in these pastoral estates. But more importantly, it's the silver and the silver mines. And so you have the discovery of huge veins of silver in Peru and Mexico as well. So you've got boom towns. One of the biggest ones in human history includes Potosi, which is actually, will number in the end 200,000 people mining in these regions here. And much of this is going to be done through an exploitative process known as the mita system. So again, that old Incan forced labor system that would be used by the Spanish as a means to extract labor from Native American tribes to mine silver for them. The Spanish will eventually pack up this silver on silver trains across the South American and Central American continent and then put them on ships. And from there, it's going to go all over the world in these particular treasure ships. And so when you do get the chance, hopefully there'll be the link that is provided for this quick interlude here to kind of get a sense that there will be piracy across the world because of this lucrative trade, not only in the Caribbean, which it's famous for, but also across the globe. So if the link is available, please go and view that video. But at the exact exact same time in China, there are things that are going on. China is starting to make a number of different policies, including one that dealt with a coinage. And particularly, there's a shortage in China of copper and bronze coin. They've tried paper currency, but it didn't quite work as well. And we've talked about the problems of inflation and overprinting and so forth that occurred in the Song, but particularly the Mongol Yuan dynasty as well. Okay. China is also dealing with some border crises as well. They're always going to try to protect the northern border, but then also in the southern border, as there are pirates that are now intervening in this area, they wanted to make major restrictions on maritime trade because, one, they didn't need to trade goods for themselves here, and so they wanted also limit the amount of smuggling that is going on in the South China Seas as well. And so one issue that they're going to have to deal with is, again, we talked about these pirates. These are known as the Wokou pirates, many of them from Japan, Korea, and Taiwan. But China, realizing that there's a coin shortage, they started to use silver and really have these pieces of silver that they would actually break off particular chunks in order to pay for goods. Silver became more and more a currency that people in China could use. And so there was a source from Japan. But even that source was starting to run out as well here. And so the Chinese finally lifted some restrictions on maritime trade, and they started to send their merchants to different places to try to search for new means of currency. And it's at that exact same time when the Spanish conquered the Philippines. And in doing so, they started to have direct access to Chinese goods because now they can bring silver directly into China. And now, for the first time in human history, we've got real, true globalism. So what happens? So the silver from the Americas are going to be shipped from Peru and Mexico to the New World, and it's going to have drastic consequences as capital is brought and silver is brought to the New World. Spain is going to use it for not so great circumstances. They're going to have continental ambitions to build an empire all across Central Europe. So they're going to spend it on wars of succession and wars of religion, supporting Catholicism against the new Protestant Reformation. But in doing so, they're going to weaken their own economy, and the amount of silver that's going to come in is actually going to generate a lot of inflation that they never really control. But all of this currency is going to bring about the rise of the financial maritime states, England, the Netherlands particularly, because they're going to have silver that's coming in, resources that are being bought left and right, and so their investment in different places is going to allow for them to create not just empires by ships, but also empires by financing. And we'll talk more about that in the next unit because this itself is going to fuel the Industrial Revolution. But another drastic consequence is what happens in Africa. As all these goods are coming in, sugar plantations are developing, it requires labor, and it's going to empower states like Asante and Benin, these militaristic states in Africa that grow because they become the source of the slave trade. So these new military elite and port cities that are developing. But silver is also going to go the other way, like we mentioned, across the Pacific into the Philippines and into East Asia. And it's going to go from Manila all the way to Alexandria again because of the intervention in the Indian Ocean. It's going to do a number of things. One, the export of silk, tea, and porcelain is going to dramatically increase. And in doing so, it's not just China that grows, it's also going to be India as well. So you've got new buildings like the famed Taj Mahal that is built. Much of it is going to come about from the exports that are happening in India and other places in the Mughal empires, the funding of arts and architecture. Silver and export goods in Japan is going to solidify the rule of the new Tokugawa shogunate, and that's going to continue for a few hundred years, and it's going to connect Japan with the rest of the globe more so. Ming and Qing China are going to realize that taxation through silver really is the only method that's going to replace paper and copper. And so more and more so China and Chinese is going to end up in the creation of silk and silk products. But in the end, silk prices are going to be gutted, too much silk on the market and just too much silver in the system as well because Spain just keeps on mining the goods and sending it overseas as well. But there is a global effect that comes about from Spain and Spanish silver. And what that results in is this process that we call mercantilism. because these new nation states are going to start to create policies, okay, that in the end are going to try to fund the central government as much as possible. Okay, that new colonies are going to be developed as a means to support the mother country. So they're going to create things like monopolies. Okay? They're going to give organizations like, for example, the East India Company, a monopoly on resources like tea and other goods as well, so that in the end the state will benefit, from the colonies that they generate across the globe. So this illustration here really does demonstrate what mercantilism is. We'll discuss it further, in other times as well. Okay. Now, there are religious effects as well, in regards to the new Spanish colonies. Groups, religious orders like the Dominicans, and the Franciscans, who have been around for hundreds of years, and also new groups like the Jesuits will often accompany the Spanish explorers and conquistadors, and they're going to try to spread Christianity as much as possible. And one way they do so is the creation of these missions that exist all over Mexico and also the coast of California as well. These groups become sort of religious and secular powers, not always feudal lords way out in places that the Spanish government had very little control over. And it's going to create a powerful Catholic Church. They will become, in a lot of ways, landowners, feudal lords, with Native Americans working in farms and trying to learn to become European, sometimes willfully, a lot of times forcibly, by these missionaries. There's generally a failure to convert, because of the Christianity is just going to be different. And there are some successes in conversion when there is some syncretism, where Native American spiritualism sort of matches with the iconology of saints, sort of the reverence of saints, praying through the saints, and particularly in the person of the Virgin Mary as well. And so you're going to see a distinct difference between Latin American Catholicism versus what developed in Europe as well. There is some good in the work of people like Bartolome de las Casas and Father Montesinos, both of which highlighted some of the abuses that the conquistadors and hacendados were forcing upon the Native Americans. They reported this to the Spanish crown, and what that formulated was what is known as the encomienda system, basically a land grant system where the Spanish crown is going to basically give rights to Native Americans, that they would be treated better, taught Christianity. In exchange, the hacendados are supposed to treat Native Americans well and also to Christianize them as well. But either way, there is some defense of Native American and treatment of Native Americans due to the work of some of the religious priests. Now, we're going to go ahead and shift gears a little bit to British North America. And so with that, you want to think about one of the document responses that we have in regards to the European monarchs and some of the limitations that were placed on European monarchs as well. So go ahead and make sure you do the document response that is provided previously. And you'll see that, especially in England, and the limits of the monarchy means that the system of colonization is going to be a little bit more different, a lot more decentralized, and those who decide to colonize the New World will have it a little bit differently as well. Now, some of the causes of colonization in regards to the French and British explorers that will go out, or English explorers, if you're looking at this map here, they are trying to find another way to India and China by sea. And they attempt to do so. They go across the Mississippi, they go way up north, but in the end, they're going to try and they're going to search for new routes to East Asia. Also, not only that, there are a lot of fishermen who will find their way across the Atlantic as they're following new places to fish for cod. But either way, the English colonies that develop will be a little bit different, in that they are, instead of this intrusive structure, they're going to be much, much lower cost and less government influences. Because in places like in Virginia and in Massachusetts, the goal were twofold. One of which is they try to act like Spain, but because of where they are, they didn't have access to gold and silver. Where they landed, there was no gold or silver. And so despite the failures of these early efforts in Virginia, they eventually will settle in. And these mercantile joint stock company will find other ways to earn profits. But either way, it's they are the ones who are actually trying to create these early colonies and trying to convince early settlers to actually come. And so the result of which is, again, they're trying to generate profit. And when they finally get to crops like tobacco and rice and sugar, they're going to finally earn a profit. But either way, these are private organizations that are trying to earn money through these ventures. They're going to receive grants from the English or the French crowns, but in the end, they're going to be left on their own to their own devices as well. They'll be granted some royal charters in order to generate this, and so they're going to create, like say for example, the pilgrims who eventually are seeking religious freedom in the New World. They're going to create documents like the Mayflower Compact. And you're also going to get in Virginia the creation of these legislative assemblies that are formed by land-owning citizens like the House of Burgesses. And so in either way, you have these independent governments that are in a lot of ways governing on their own, sort of very independent kids who are kind of doing their own thing, right? They're not paying attention to their parents in their home countries. You want to use that analogy. Okay? And so later on, when the English crown attempts to try to seize more control and over these colonies, they're going to get pushed back. Because this is not how they've done it, right? These independent groups, whether it's groups looking for religious freedom or those mercantile groups looking for profits, many of which are independent landowners, and they don't like the fact that the English crown is going to try to push on and put pressure on them. And so as the throne tries to seize power, they're going to have issues in their colonies. Okay. And one of the blessings in disguise, in a sense, is the lack of gold in the Americas. And so what that's going to generate is much more independent landowners, these what we call yeoman farmers, and wage laborers who are working in the cities, indentured servants, many of which will become yeoman farmers themselves here, small independent landowners who are again, independent of the Spanish crown. There aren't as many huge landowners as you have the sort of haciendas that exist in the Spanish world. And so there are different ways, and you can make an argument these are much more sustainable means to generate colonies. And so small farms, commerce, in the New England and the middle colonies. In the South, you start to see similar items like you see in the Spanish world. These large aristocratic plantations, growing cash crops like tobacco, sugar, and rice, and so forth as well. And so like you see in the image right there, what that's going to generate is one of the saddest chapters in human history, and that is the slave trade, not just in the southern colonies, but as you're looking at this image here, it's a lot of South America and also the British colonies in the Caribbean as well. So it's not just the American South, but then also in places like Jamaica and Barbados and so forth here. And so the African-based slavery will become the core means of coerced labor in this region. What that's also going to generate is going to be a reliance, specialization, and something we call triangular trade, where you know you're going to get products and goods from each of these regions, and there's a dependence upon regional and interregional trade in order for this new system to continue. This is what we call triangular trade in the American world here. Finally, we've got some religious changes as well. And the societies, the independent religious societies that are generated in the New World, like the Puritans, in trying to create their own religious society, is going to create something new, something independent. Even missionary work itself is dependent as well. And so one last item deals with the creation of what we call Vodun, which is a new syncretized religion, mixed of Spanish Catholicism, West African, and Native American spiritualism as well. But what we're able to create here are a number of these what we call global maritime empires, one new way of state building in the early modern world. But for the English and the Spanish, there are some challenges to this. The first of which in Spain, they're going to deal with needing to maintain this rule where Peninsulars and the Creoles remain all powerful over a vast, vast population of Native Americans, Black Africans, and a number of groups that are mixed. And not only that, but to try to find economic expansion beyond just simply silver, which will more or less run out. Okay. The Catholic Church, due to the missions and others, will become a very powerful factor. Okay. And so in a lot of ways, Spanish America is a reflection of feudal Spain, a powerful nobility, a powerful Catholic Church, and limited power for the serfs and other groups as well. Okay. They'll also deal with piracy, okay, from the English, the French, the Dutch, and others who are trying to fend off Spanish power, and they're going to fight a number of wars. England will also deal with imperial competition from the Dutch and the French. And not only that, but as they, like we mentioned before, they try to implement more power over others, there's going to be greater confrontation with their own colonies as they try to tax these places more. And lastly, they're going to have to deal with piracy as well. So come back, answer the SAQ questions in the document, and then from there, feel free to go back in the video in order to answer the question as need be.